All right, everyone. I think it's time to begin our session on migrating accounting systems. My name is Nathan Rogerson. I'm over here on the marketing team at Zoho. A little housekeeping before we get started. This course will be for 2 CPE credits. And in order to receive that, you need to answer 6 out of the 8 questions. And so those will be poll questions and they'll be coming throughout the session. You also need to stay to the very end to answer a evaluation form. That's just at the very end. And we also, if you're not receiving CPE credits, we would appreciate anybody taking that just because it really helps us kind of navigate through and help us figure out other webinars we should be doing or techniques we should try out. And like I said, I'm on the marketing team over here at Zoho, and we're part of the finance team as well. We help out with the partners and onboarding them. And I'll let Tala and Val kind of introduce themselves. Tala, are you there? Val, are you there?
Yes, right here. So happy to join with you today, folks. My background is in accounting. You might want to back up one slide there, Nathan. And I'm CPA. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I've seen a lot in the industry related to accounting, technology, information systems. My current responsibilities at Zoho is I am responsible for the accountants program for North America and England and a few other places. So I'm bottom line responsible, making sure that we cater to the needs of bookkeepers, accountants, CPAs, chartered accountants, everyone kind of involved in the accounting profession. So I'm thrilled to be here. Migrating accounting systems and dealing with accounting systems is something I've done for many, many years. So what we have to talk with you about today, I think, is a really great session with good concepts, and I think a really, really well experienced key speaker here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also my background is in accounting advisory as well. And this is one of the biggest struggles I've had in the past with clients. And it's really great to kind of see the direction that Josh is taking us in with this as well. Tala, are you there?
Hey there, Nathan. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry about that. I feel like I got disconnected for a second. But thanks so much for the intro. I'm a program manager here at Zoho for our Zoho Accountants program. If any of you are interested in becoming a partner with Zoho, we'll have more information at the end, but you can also visit zoho.com/CPE to learn more about how you can become a partner. But I'm really happy to be here today and really excited for today's session with our speaker, Josh Blesnick.
Yeah, awesome. And without further ado, let's introduce Josh. So Josh, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so Josh works with Pressey and Nagel, and I'll let him kind of touch base on what his background is and what his company does as well.
Sure. Thanks, Nathan, for the introduction. So my name is Josh Blesnick. I work for Presti and Neagley. We are a full-fledged accounting firm in New York City, and we specialize in audit and tax, and we also have a consulting arena and arm where we do implementations, conversions, as well as migrations for accounting systems. And here I'm a consultant, and that's my specialty in terms of implementations and migrations for Zoho Books, other accounting software packages.
Can you explain a little bit more about what your business does as well?
Sure. So
I guess go to the next slide.
like I mentioned, we're a full-fledged accounting firm specializing in tax, financial statements, bookkeeping, as well as we have a consulting arm and where we do implementation, migration, conversions, training within the arena of accounting technology, and we've been around since 1982.
Awesome. That's great. So before we get started on Josh's piece, I kind of wanted to do a little intro to Zoho. And also I wanted to point out on the left-hand side, if you can see the question panel or the chat section, you can go over there and chat with us or ask us some questions. And throughout the webinar, we will be answering questions. And at the very end, we'll try to take as many questions as we can and answer them. And we also have handouts at the bottom left, and that will have this presentation. Also, we'll have a few other handouts that Josh will cover throughout the webinar. And so what is Zoho? If you can go to the next slide, please.
Nathan, you want to talk to them about the polling questions to make sure they understand what they've got to complete to get CP credit.
Yeah, I mentioned that at the beginning. Just a quick reminder that you need to answer 6 out of the 8 poll questions, and we'll be kind of submitting those throughout the webinar. And so Zoho, we have over 40 applications, and with those applications, it covers sales, finance, IT, human resources, custom solutions, and email collaboration. And kind of like what I mentioned, we are part of the finance team, and what that really covers is books, which is what we're going to be involved in right now, and also has a great inventory tool and a great expense tool, invoice and subscription. So I really advise you kind of check those out if you've never messed around with Zoho before. And another cool thing is, like Tala mentioned earlier, we are part of the partner program, and you can actually go on zoho.com/CPA, and you can either become a partner or you can find a partner who can help you with your accounting. Go ahead and go next. So yeah, Josh, thanks for joining us today. And if you can go ahead and get started on your migrating accounting systems.
Sure. So I hope everybody can see me as well. I just put on my camera. But today the topic of discussion is migrating accounting systems and what your involvement is as a end user and how we actually can accomplish the migration from another system into Zoho Books. So today we'll be doing demos as throughout the presentation, as well as have a discussion with Val, Nathan, and Tala, and flipping through some slides as well as a demo. So I'm very excited, and let's get started. So the first thing is a lot of people are resistant to change. A new system may come with additional functionality, increased efficiency, but you're definitely changing the type of system you have, as well as who puts in the data and how the data is put in. So understanding the vital process is very important. And one of the things that we try to accomplish is we do a needs analysis. And the needs analysis and business process review is a run through of what you're currently doing in your current system and understanding what it is. So if you're entering in bills, bill payments, checks, expenses, understanding how they're being put in, who's putting them in, what the data is given to you if it's from an outside provider, and how it's actually put into the system, as well as a big functionality that a lot of people like when using a cloud-based system is bank feeds, and understanding how the bank feed functionality works and how you can enter in your data.
Josh, let me add here just a management point too. This whole upfront process, when people consider a new accounting system and you go through and do a needs analysis, that's so terribly important for a number of reasons. One, that a lot of people don't realize is buy-in, to help everyone across the board get on the same page, see the same needs, and especially get buy-in top to bottom. If you don't have buy-in across the entire organization, you're going to have rebels through the migration that really create all kinds of trouble in this migration process. So it's very important that you have buy-in top to bottom. If you've got executives in an organization that aren't going to really buy into this new system, that becomes a huge stumbling block to the migration. So everything Josh is talking about through the needs analysis process is so important, and especially with everyone's buy-in from the lowest level employee to the top management and owner.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you said rebels, Val, because one of the corporations I worked at previously, we were trying to transfer over to Oracle, and we did have some rebels who really fought it, and we ended up never transferring over to Oracle because of, what you said was rebels. I think that's pretty funny.
For sure. And one thing, Val, also on this topic that I just want to point out is that not necessarily the person that a consultant would be dealing with, or the person that I deal with when it comes to a migration, is a decision maker. And it's very important to make sure that the CFO or CEO is also involved within the process, because there will be some decision making and business processes change when using the new system, and having buy-in from everybody definitely increases that.
Awesome, awesome.
So just moving along, before we, this is now the meats and potatoes of the presentation. So the migration path, and this is can definitely be altered depending on what you're trying to do and the type of data you have. But this is a generic overview of the best steps and best practices to get the data into the current system. I'm going to use the term legacy system for the old system, and then be able to reconcile and make sure that the data is put in correctly. So the first thing is custom integrations. Um, Understanding if there's any types of third-party systems that are being connected through the accounting system. Having a definite cutoff date, so where the legacy system to the new system would actually, the legacy system would stop and the new system would start. A clean legacy system, which we'll talk about further into the presentation. Chart of accounts implementation, lists, open balances, open transactions, the data migration check, which is the reconciliation, and then go live.
Awesome, awesome. Is this kind of something you show your clients before you get started, Josh, or is this just more of an internal thing on your team?
So it really depends. There are types of migration projects that, we're given the data and it's do it. I'm not really part of the, clients will say I'm not really part of the meats and potatoes of entering in data. I have a third party person that does it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just do it? And
Yeah.
in those cases, the answer to your question would be no, I don't show it.
Mm-hmm.
But typically migration projects take 2 to 4 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and can take up to 6 weeks depending on the amount of data that you want in. So
Mm-hmm.
what we do is we draw up a plan, and the plan consists of user acceptance of the data that is being put in, showing them the raw data beforehand, and kind of showing them the process and the steps that we'll take, and having weekly calls, so everybody's on the same page and knows what's happening throughout the process.
Yeah, I'm sure you touch base on this later in the webinar, but I kind of wanted to point out as well, this is not an easy process. A lot of times I've had clients where they think it can take a day, or whenever I'm at billable hours, they think it only takes 4 hours or so. And then they get the bill at the end and they go, oh my goodness, what happened? And so that's just something that kind of Josh said right here was it just takes time, and you need to be patient, and you also need to be more willing to understand the bill at the very end as well.
Yeah, and you need to, in my mind, you need to take whatever time you plan on. Let's say you think this is going to take you a month, and times that by two, just in the back of your mind. Just always expect it's going to take you about twice as long as what you thought to get a migration done. That way, you're not going to set your expectations too high.
Yeah.
One other thing that's assumed in here, Josh is a big time data accounting systems professional. So part of his list that he might not have shown you in this migration path is a real important point that I'd like to point out to everyone on the webcast here. If you're going to go out and do this in your own business, don't forget to back up data. Don't forget to back up the existing system and get steps along the way in case you've got to back up. That's a huge deal that I'll see people that go out and want to do a self migration. I'm going to move us off this to that and whatever. And it can be done, but one of the problems I see is they end up mucking up data and then having to go back. And when I was doing this for a lot of clients, which I did for many years, I would drag around a large external hard drive with me. And, in today's world, it'd be a big issue with privacy. But back then, I had a copy of every one of my clients' data as of the date I was last in their office working on their accounting system. And I can't tell you how many times I got the call, hey, Val, you were out here the other day. Do you still happen to have that copy of our data? Because they'd muck something up or whatever. So, yeah, I can't stress backups enough, especially in this process that we're moving forward here with migration.
Yeah.
So just moving along, now we're going to discuss integrations. So many people who use an accounting system has some type of third-party integration. Uh, just to name a few: payroll, inventory, CRM, accounts payable, accounts receivable solutions, 1099 software, Office 365, and other applications. The greatest part about using Zoho is that they have every single type of application that you can use for your business. So all of them integrate together, and you're able to use them together and have a seamless integration. So just moving along, the main part of the planning of the migration is the cutoff date. Now, the cutoff date gives you the ability to keep the data in the legacy system and make sure that it's clean and have a clean cutoff. So when you're moving to the new system, you know everything reconciles up to that specific date.
Mm-hmm. What do you do, Josh, whenever someone doesn't necessarily want a firm cutoff date? Do you kind of direct them into this is what we're going to do, or how do you kind of answer that or guide them in the right direction?
So typically, we like to do a cutoff date at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And we, like, for instance, I'm working on a couple projects as of now. So the cutoff date is May 31st.
Mm-hmm.
And we then bring in all data from date up to May 31st. And then from June 1st going forward, we'll do the import at the end. So there's less downtime. We'll do it over a weekend because it's only 25 days worth of data, and do that. So to answer your
Yeah.
question in short, depending on what's reconciled and what's not, we try to have a clean cutoff.
Yeah.
So data is being smoothly
Transferred
transitioned
over.
and there's
Mhm.
no issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the issue of cutoff date or no cutoff date, that doesn't exist because you have to have a cutoff date. Without a
Mhm.
cutoff date, you have nothing but chaos. Your
Yeah.
accounting system would be a mess on both sides. So
Yeah.
Awesome. So just moving along, after we have a clean cutoff date, the next thing is to scrub the old data, take a look at it, and make sure everything is clean. So one of the things that we look for within the review of data are duplicate names, customer names that are no longer active, vendors that you have not worked with in years, inactive employees, products and services that aren't offered anymore, as well as any additional tags or transactions. So one of the things that we do is we take all the raw data and put it into spreadsheets, and then after we have the spreadsheets, I go through them and flag these types of transactions and these types of issues and ask the client what they want to do with it. A lot of
Mhm.
times when you have a consultant doing this, they move data and they don't really ask questions and get a feel, an idea of how the data should be presented. And that's definitely key because it's really your system and your data, and you want everything to uh, look correct and
Mhm.
look in a way that you feel comfortable.
Yeah. This actually used to be my favorite part whenever I would do the accounting advisory work, is just going in there and cleaning up everything and kind of pointing out not necessarily flaws in the system or anything, but pointing out, hey, we can improve here. Let's kind of work on a way to go through this. And really, I would set apart of some of that time to sit down with a client and go through my findings and helping them kind of understand all the accounts and transactions that didn't need to be in the accounting system.
And the other thing is also neat is that sometimes moving data from, let's say, we're going to use for the rest of the webinar QBO to Zoho Books, when you move it, a lot of the data doesn't present the same way.
Hmm.
In terms of customers' addresses, ship to addresses, customer contacts, if you have, let's say, one type of contact and there's 4 or 5 different subs, sometimes it doesn't show exactly. So to be able to ask the client and get their opinion and make sure that they feel comfortable with what it's going to look like in the new system and show them examples is definitely key.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of brings us to the next point of the migrating decisions is just why do you need to do it and when do you need to bring over the old data and how basically what you're kind of saying is paying attention to the way it looks in the old machine versus the new one for sure.
So one of the main things with the decisions of migrating and what you're going to migrate is really what you need. And there are three types of migrations that I like to say that we offer. Obviously, we can do whatever you need, but the standard type of migrations, there are three. One of them would be a full data set. You're moving everything from, let's say, QBO to Zoho Books from the beginning of time. Then we can do a partial migration, which would be open list balances up to a specific date. So that would be, a trial balance that you can use for historical financial reporting, balance sheet, and a P&L, and then bring in transactions to a certain date going forward. So as an example of the partial migration, I actually worked on one 6 months ago that was 2009 to 2014, which was all balance sheet and P&L data. No historic transactions, just the summary of of balances. And then from 14 forward was the transactional data. And then the other type of migration is a partial migration where we would just bring in certain types of transactional data up to a specific date.
Mm-hmm.
So just to show quickly, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So here we have, this is Zoho Books. Everybody can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So here's Zoho Books, and we'll definitely walk through all of the modules individually. But the first thing is to start with the list data and get the list data into Zoho Books and make sure that the list data looks clean and we have all the information that we need. So if we went into QBO, now this is a sample company that QuickBooks offers, we can create a customer contact list, which would lay out all of the fields needed for customers. So here we have your customers, your phone number, email, full name, addresses, etc. And one of the functionalities within QBO is if you click on the gear icon on the right, you can show any additional fields that you would like to be added to this. And you can export it into Excel. And once you have the Excel sheet exported, then we can sort this and get it ready to import into Zoho Books. So Zoho Books has a template, and I know in the course material we have all of the templates listed there, so you can use that as a guide and also follow along. But this is the template for customers, and these are the fields that are required to add your customers from one system to another. So here we have your contact name, display name, company name, salutation, first name, last name, email, and then the billing addresses, as well as the shipping addresses, and then any custom fields that might be there. Now, one of the things that I just want to point out and make sure is very clear is the mapping for the imports are crucial and very essential. A lot of people think that yes, you can do this yourself, and realistically, you can do this yourself. However, getting into the weeds of the transaction types, there are different types of transactions that in QuickBooks don't match up properly within Zoho, and vice versa. So understanding what the data is, as well as what the fields are that are needed, is very crucial in this situation. And one of the things also is that once you use these templates, you're able to change the headers on the export sheets that you're getting from QuickBooks and being able to modify them to match what is needed within the import.
Yeah, and I would definitely advise kind of taking your time with this process if you're trying to do it by yourself and not using an accountant, just because it can be overwhelming. And whenever you start to import, if you don't do it correctly, you're going to keep getting an error and you will ultimately just end up being frustrated.
100%. And it definitely is a frustrating process. One of the things also I want to point out with your comment, Nathan, is to error check your sheets before you actually import them.
Yes.
And that is very critical as well, um, because when you're trying to put in the data, we don't want you to get errors, try to fix them, go back and forth, but to be able to look at the data, make sure it's clean, fix the fields that are needed, and after that is done, uh, you move along, error check them, and then start importing them. And the
Mhm.
error checking them is putting them through the import module, which I'll show you in a second,
Mhm.
to see if anything spits out incorrectly. So within Zoho Books, on every module, I'm just going into customers. There is the hamburger icon. I know it's 3-4 lines, but we're going to call it hamburger. There's an import button. So to import the customers, it's going to ask you if you want to import customers or customer contact persons. We're going to use customers, and then you're able to put in the file that you want to import. So I'm going to navigate to customers, and you'll see that this was imported here.
Mhm.
And then you can press next. And the good thing about this is that if all the headers match up properly, and you've changed the headers from your QBO sheet to the sheet that you want to enter into Zoho Books, the headers will automatically populate in the imported fields. So any type of import that I always do, and I can't stress this enough, is to make sure that the headers names match as much as possible so we can uh, do that.
For sure.
So after we have this, we can, go through, see if there's any additional fields that are needed, and then click next, which will take us to the preview. It'll show us if there's any records skipped or if everything is ready to import. And there's one record ready to import, and we can click import. And there we have it. We imported our customer. His name was Fletcher. So let's just look quickly. Sorry. Ethan Samuel. Display name is Flashster, which is right here. And now we have our new customer.
Hmm.
So this also works with vendors as well, and all other types of transactions.
Mhm.
If we go into the vendors tab within Zoho Books and click on the gear icon, we're able to go here, look at the import file, choose the file that we're looking for, and import it that way. Now that we've explained the conversion types, which are the full data migration as well as a partial migration, and we also discussed how to get in your list data. We're going to now start the migration process with the financial aspect. And the first thing is to start importing your chart of accounts. Now, the chart of accounts is the number one area where your accountant can be involved. Typically, your chart of accounts has different buckets where your income and expenses go into. And this gives the accountant an opportunity to revamp your chart of accounts as well as have new types of buckets or track your accounting in a different manner. And any pain points that you had previously, this now gives you the opportunity to fix them. So within Zoho Books, we have chart of accounts, and this is your chart of accounts listing. Very similar to QuickBooks or any other accounting system that you're using, and it gives you the opportunity to import your list of bank accounts, income accounts, other current assets, liabilities, etc. So the one way to start this import is to go to the gear icon and go to import chart of accounts. And the same way of we did before, you would choose file and we would go into your chart of accounts file. And then after this loads, you're able to click next. And like I said before, to have all the headers here, and then click next, and then you're able to import your chart of accounts. Now, while we're demoing this as well, I want to show you within QBO the best way to get your chart of accounts and take a look at them. So you can grab them from the gear icon here. On the left side, under your company, there's chart of accounts, which will take you to this screen. And this will list all the accounts that you currently have. Now, any changes to the chart of accounts or changes that need to be made, I highly recommend doing them in the legacy system first, so your data will match completely from the legacy system to the new system. A lot of people, what they do is uh, import their chart of accounts as is and says, hey, I want this changed, and then merge or change names of accounts. And when they go back for reconciliation purposes, they're not sure exactly what matches. So it's very key to make sure you make those changes in the legacy system.
Josh, I just wanted to kind of point out something. This is kind of what I used to do. If it was, say, a client needed to clean something up, but it was for, say, it's June, right? June 2020, and they wanted, but as of 2019, their QuickBooks file was completely reconciled. Everything was good to go. But then in 2020, they started implementing all these new customers and all these new things, and everything started to get screwed up in 2020. Would you recommend just starting fresh in 2020 with the new accounting system, or would you still try to clean up QuickBooks up until June and then match it with the new accounting system?
So that's a very good question, and I think there are two valuables part of that question. One of them is that if they are bringing in historical data up until 2020, then the historical data should be checked. And I know you didn't mention that, but the historical data should be checked and fixed in the legacy system.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not bringing in historical data and they're just starting their books as of 2020 going forward, or bringing in transactions up until, let's say, May 31st or as of today, then we can correct that in the new system and it won't be an issue
Mm-hmm.
at all, actually.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the situation, but it can be fixed in the new system.
Yeah.
If that
It
answers
just,
your question.
yeah, I guess it depends if it's a tax deadline or not, which route you got to go, right?
100%. So just walking through the chart of accounts, you can export this data here by running a report or a account list and exporting the account list and seeing what needs to be brought over. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is there are some accounts that you wouldn't need to bring over because they have a zero balance. As an example, this depreciation account has a zero balance. So it would make sense to make this inactive in QBO. It just logged me out, but inactive in QBO so you can then import the active and active only accounts into Zoho Books. So after we have all the list data in, now we start the migration of the transactions. And the transactions typically start with the first link transaction, and I'll explain what that means in a second. A lot of times people think or want to just import the transactions they have ready to import and just push them in. And not necessarily it works that way. As an example, you cannot import receive payments without importing the invoices first. You can import bill payments without importing the bills first, and so on. So typically, the after we have the customers and vendors and the chart of accounts, the next is to get all of the import sheets ready for all transaction types. And we would start with invoices, invoice payments, estimates, sales orders, purchase orders, and so on. And then on the vendor side, bills, bill payments, etc. So this migration path continued shows the other types of open balances and open transactions, such as your trial balance as of a cutoff date. If you are, let's say, cutting off in 2010, we would want 2009 opening balances to be there. AR aging detail, as well as AP aging detail, and outstanding bank transactions, as well as open AR invoices and open AP invoices. So when we do this migration, we would need the open invoices and open bills as of a certain date, and we would want the accounts receivable and accounts payable to tie as much as possible. So now, after everything's migrated, we have to check the data and do a migration check. And this is the final check before you move to the new system to ensure all the data and balance sheet, trial balance, profit and loss, open sales, purchase transactions reconcile between both systems and match correctly. And if there's any inconsistencies or anything like that, we check it, and then we are ready to go live and start. Also, we have the go live date, and there are two ways to go live. One would be parallel, and then one would be a regular live kickoff. The parallel is where somebody would work in both systems for a certain particular period of time. And typically lots of businesses want to do that if there is a training curve or a some part of training that needs to be done, that they understand what data is being put in what system and have a feel for it before pushing the button and being stuck in a new system that they unfortunately don't understand yet.
Awesome. I do have a question with that, Josh. Kind of what do you prefer whenever you're working on a new client?
So typically we do not like, as a firm, we do not support the parallel approach unless the client wants to go that way.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, I have somebody who's actually been running parallel for 6 months.
Okay.
I did a big data migration from a homegrown system into another system, and they've been going go live for. They've been live running parallel for about 6 months already. The reason why we don't like that is our main goal as consultants is to decrease downtime. We don't want
Yeah.
you to have any downtime. We want you to come to work on Monday, switch to your accounting system, and be able to work like if it was any ordinary Monday without any changes. So, just to answer your question a little further, what we like to do is we migrate everything over to a specific time period with a cutoff date. As if we did this today, it would be May 31st,
Mm-hmm.
last day in May. And we would then start, as soon as the migration is done, we would start the training process. If there is training that is needed, show your bookkeepers, your accountants how to enter in bills, how to create invoices, and make sure now the forms that you'll be printed, if you do print invoices or send invoices via email, that you're getting, it looks like the way you want it to look like. And then we make the cutoff during a weekend, so then you're already trained and able to start working in the new system on a Monday or a Tuesday morning.
Yeah, for sure. I've also kind of seen whenever I used to do my work, whenever I would run parallel with clients, a lot of times I would go back to the client because I couldn't figure something out, and then they would go, "Oh yeah, I put this in the in the old system, and I didn't put it in the new one." Type of situation. It would just be, "Oh, okay, obviously that's why I was having issues," type of thing. So, kind of what Josh is saying. I think more for the advisors, you do want to have a go live date rather than run parallel, just because it makes it cleaner. But at the same time, if your client needs to run parallel because they have so much work they need to put in every single day, then you might need to go that route as well.
Awesome. So Nate, before we go into the demo and demo some more, I know that there's been a bunch of questions being answered by Val and Tala, and I greatly appreciate that. If I can ask Val or Tala if there's any questions that can be addressed on the air before we go into the demo, that would be awesome.
You know,
He can
Josh,
answer.
there's one I've been going back and forth on a little bit here. Services. You don't really put services in inventory in Zoho Books, right? I mean, service is just a class of service that you charge on an invoice.
Correct. And I actually was looking at that question, and that this is why I actually proposed this idea. So I'm going to give you the QuickBooks answer, and then just because if you're moving, let's say, from QBO to Zoho in this scenario, um, in QBO, you have the option of having non-inventory parts and inventory parts. Non-inventory parts are usually used for services. Now you can create a non-inventory part or a type of product and service that is not um, connected with inventory in Zoho Books, and that's where that would go to. So the main thing is that you need items to be able to populate on your invoice, and there are non-inventory style items that can be added that will allow you to populate them and attach them to the correct account. And we'll show you that momentarily.
And one thing, this is Tala here. One thing, Josh, I wanted to add was one of the questions we received earlier was on setting up opening balances for customers. And so one of the things, of course, I thought of was this is something that's pulled from, basically your invoice import, right? Your accounts receivable. But it looks like there's also an opening balance for customers and vendors when you are mapping fields for customers. So do you have any experience with that, or how would you bring in opening balances for those customers?
So typically, you can map them when you're doing it through a customer or a vendor import. But since you're going to in this scenario, let's say you're going to be putting in the transactional detail, you'll be able to, if you're, let's say, importing bills, let's use vendors as an example, bills and bill payments. Those bills and bill payments will then show what the open balance is, because you'll have bills that are not paid that are considered open that have no attachments to it. So in that case, if you're bringing in all transactional detail, you can avoid that during the import when you're actually putting in the list data, because the transactions will take care of that for you. If that answers that question.
No, absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that. Val, was there any other questions that kind of stood out to you that you wanted to bring up?
Well, we've been talking a little bit about payroll here, and one person wanted to know that there's, California, Texas payroll. but he can't find, or they can't find very limited information about it. So what I was going to tell him is maybe send us an email and follow up after the webcast and see if we can get them connected with the payroll information for the states that we do have.
Mhm.
And you can always email support@zohopayroll.com to get more information as well.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing. Email support at Zoho Payroll. Excellent. That's probably the best answer.
So, Tala, one of the things that I wanted to point out before moving forward in the demo is this documentation that I know is part of the links in the documentation provided during the webcast. And this clearly identifies specific ways of how to import things into Zoho Books and what is needed. And this is a very good document that goes through the configuration of Excel sheets, as well as how to update opening balances, create taxes, export data from the previous system, and then import it into Zoho. So this is definitely a reference that everybody can use. You can also feel free to reach out to me if this is something that you're currently going through and need help or assistance. But this is definitely a good document to use as a reference.
Thanks for highlighting that. And just so everyone knows, this is found in the Handouts tab on the left-hand side of your Zoho Showtime screen. It should be listed there as Migration Guide. I think Migration Guide is a little bit of a stretch. The presentation Josh is presenting now is significantly more detailed. Consider this kind of a migration guide in terms of helping you with individual modules, understanding just where the import buttons are, kind of the different options you'll find there. So this is something you'll want to use in addition to a more specific guide by someone like Josh.
Awesome. Thank you, Tala. So just moving the conversation forward, now within the demo, I'm going to demo the migration part of the presentation after everything is quote unquote imported, and how to actually import some other types of transactions. And then after we have that, we'll give a generic overview of Zoho Books in detail. So after the main thing, just to reiterate, is to get your list data in. So the best place to start is customers and vendors, and the customers would be listed under sales. So like I showed you earlier, we would export the data out of QBO, use the import template to match the header names, and then go over to the hamburger icon over here and go to import customers. You can do that for vendors as well under purchases, and be able to put in all of the vendors also. Then after your customers and vendors are in, the next phase of the game is your chart of accounts. And then we would go under accountant, chart of accounts, and here is a chart of accounts already listed for this company. But if we wanted to add any types of chart of accounts, we would go into import chart of accounts here. And one of the things that I want to point out is that if we go into the template for chart of accounts, just bring this outlines what is needed. So we would have the account name, the account code, description if there is any, the account type, if it's a parent or a child. Now, the parent account would be in column E. And one thing for you to know is that in QBO, any parent or child account is separated by a colon. So when you're creating these mapping sheets, to realize that anything that is left of the colon is a parent account, and whatever is right of the colon would be a child. And that would have to go into two separate fields here, which I will show you that quickly. So if we go into, and I apologize that I got logged out.
No problem, Josh. I do have a kind of something to add as well. What do you recommend for clients with these parent accounts? Because I've been in a lot of situations where they'll create an expense account for, let's say, everything, right? So that they have a car, they create an expense account for tires, for paint, for engine oil. So that's whenever you start to recommend, hey, you need to just create a parent account called auto. And if you want the details of how much you're spending on just oil changes, then you can do that under your parent account, or how do you kind of go through that process?
Correct. So the parent and child account is sub accounts that you want to be more granular with the detail.
Mm-hmm.
So, as an example, gas. And then let's say you wanted to track what station you get gas from the most. You can then make a sub account, Exxon, uh,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how you would track it. Now, I know you didn't ask this, but to answer in a little more detail, the accountants really look at everything from one line item. They don't
Mm-hmm.
care as much of the parent-child relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The P&L accounts, which are your income and expenses, are really for you to be able to track what type of income that you're getting in, and what bucket is it associated with, and what your expenses really are. So if you cared what gas station you spent money in, and you really wanted to know the difference, you can add a child account.
Yeah, for sure. And it just adds, that's really for reporting and analytical type work if you just want a little bit more detail rather than, hey, I'm spending this much on automobile. So,
Yes. Um, did that answer your question, Nate?
yeah. I mean, I'm just, yeah.
So, everyone, I just wanted to show you the parent-child relationship within QBO of how it looks to be able to separate it. So, here, after you import this or export this into Excel, you'll see that this has colons. So the parent account is landing services. Then there's a sub account of job materials, and then another sub, which is this account, sprinklers and drip system. So that's something just to note. As an example, landscaping services, and then colon labor. So labor would be the sub account, and landscaping services would be the parent account. And we would separate that um, in these two separate columns. Then we have the account number, currency, open balance if there is any. And to go back to Tala's question, we can import this with an opening balance. Typically, I like to do this via journal entry, so you can control what uh, needs to be entered there, and then debit or credit of what the opening balance is. So the other thing also I want to point out is you cannot merge chart of accounts in Zoho Books after the accounts are already created. And if there's activity in these accounts, you can't merge or change the account type as well, which is a very good feature that they have because it controls what is there, and it has more controls on the data, uh, so things aren't messed up. But that's something just to note because within QBO and other accounting systems, you're able to do that. And the main thing is to have a clear, clean chart of accounts ready to be imported, and to make sure that all your account types are uh, the ones that you need them to be. So after we have your chart of accounts, we are ready to start importing the transactions. Now, typically, I like to look at the easiest transactions first, and realistically, the easiest transactions are checks. Now, what will confuse you during this process is that there are different types of transaction types that are located in QuickBooks that are not in Zoho Books. and you need to be able to know what they are and what they need to be mapped. So as an example, checks, Zoho Books doesn't have a checks module, but there's expenses. And checks are the same thing as an expense. So you would be able to add anything into the expense module this way. And the way that you would do it is the same way the gear icon and import expenses. So as an example, I'm just going to pull out the expense template and take a look at that. And here's the expense template. And we have something entry number, expense account is marketing. This is the vendor that we paid this to. The expense description, expense amount, if it's billable or not, which would be true or false. Project name, if it is a project. And then that's it. So the other key thing to know is what fields are mandatory and what's not. So typically in imports, and I actually ran into this with a client the other day who was trying to create an Excel sheet for an invoice import, and he was keep asking me about the account column. Now, invoices are generated by items, so you don't need to put what income account is associated with that because we have the item there and the item will be associated with the correct account. So when we, put in our expense template and go here, you'll see that each type of import has a red field, which will indicate what needs to be mandatory or not. And typically, just to let you know, um, the entry number, expense date, the date of the transaction, the account that it's associated to, and the person it's associated to are typically those 3 or 4 fields that are required fully um, with any type of import. So if you look here in the expenses, we have the expense date, the expense account, expense amount, and those are all the required fields. And any other types of fields that we would want to add, like a business type or a sales rep or something like that, we can definitely have that. So now that we have this Excel sheet here, we're going to click next, and none of the rows can be imported. So this is very good that it errored out, and the associated project does not exist. So there is a project, um, which would be job costing, and Zoho Books has a projects module that is not associated uh, in our file, and we would have to take that out to be able to import. So one of the things that we can do during the import process, and that's very good that this happened, and I'm just going back in and loading our template in here. And if we go down to project, we can actually make this blank. So it won't import the project in here. And expense date, the date format is not correct. So it would be month, day, year. And I hope everybody's following along. I'm actually showing you specifically the issues that happen when you load a import file and receive errors, and how to fix them. So as an example, that project wasn't here. My company doesn't use, I'm saying my company as somebody who's moving from one to another, use projects or job costing, so we wouldn't have to worry about that, nor would we need to have a project that's associated with it. And then we were able to import it. And then the main thing is to check it and to make sure it's there. So this is the actual thing that we just imported. and we will click on it. We see the expense amount for $100. It's unbilled. It's not a billable expense, and we're all good to go. So I will say that inventory typically is a beast. It's a beast in among itself in terms of how you track inventory and the way to switch from one system to another. And just to point out, a lot of systems use different types of methodology within inventory. Um, QuickBooks, as an example, uses average cost, and Zoho uses FIFO. So the inventory count will be different after the migration, and adjustments will have to be made. And that's definitely key to have an accountant or somebody help you with that to make sure that you understand the methodology and accounting process change with inventory.
And just for everyone, I wanted to point out, we're having some really great side questions in the questions panel. Feel free to kind of peruse through those. We've posted all of the answers publicly, so you can look at that Q&A there.
So back to the inventory issue, though, just so everyone's aware of this, what Josh was talking about with different inventory methods, that will usually create a little bit of an adjusting journal
Awesome.
entry somewhere in your accounting system.
Just moving along, and Tala and Val, I know I've been taking a look a little bit in terms of the great questions that are coming through in terms of importing and chart of accounts. So feel free to stop me and ask them live, and I can definitely address them over the air if needed. So moving along, after we have the expenses imported, then we can start with other transaction types. Now, the main thing is to be able to tie these transactions from the old system to the new system. And the best way to do that is to either import year by year or to import one transaction type at a time to be able to match. So as an example, if we went into QBO and went to, let's say, transaction detail report, which will give us, this is 1099. Let me look for something else. I'll do it from a profit and loss statement. So here we have all different types of invoices, sales. So if we did this by year and had a specific account, we would want to get the total of the invoices and what the total was. And there's different reports that you can use to get this information. And after you get this information, we'll want the grand total of the amount of invoices to equal what the grand total is after the import. So what I like to do is to create a spreadsheet of all the transaction types and be able to match them, have the grand totals available as a reconciliation sheet, and be able to use that for that. There's also in here a transaction detail by account, which you can sort, you can group this by transaction type and run this report and put this into Excel, which will give you the types of credit cards, types of transactions. Now, like I said previously, is there are specific transaction types that would need to be altered. One of them would be, let's say, checks are expenses. Credit card expenses are regular expenses in Zoho as well. As long as they are treated the same way in Zoho Books, it doesn't really matter what type of transaction type you enter them in. So you wouldn't want to enter in an invoice as a bill, because that would be for a vendor, but you can enter in a credit card charge as an expense, as an example.
Yeah.
So another thing also is that since Zoho has this beautiful, nice pane located on the left side, you can use this pane to go through and note that you have all the transaction types put in by module. So as an example, in sales, we have invoices. Then we would have received payments, so payments received, sales orders, estimates, and reoccurring invoices if they are. And then in purchases, we would have vendors, bills, bill payments, um, vendor credits, reoccurring expenses, etc.
Yeah,
So
and if you're doing those reoccurring transactions, you need to just make sure kind of you're not double entering your work. So a lot of times you need to match it to the bank feeds and just make sure you're not double entering them, because whenever you're bank reconciling, you will need to make sure you take those out or they match up.
for sure. So after we have everything imported, the next thing is to look at the financial reports and make sure they match. So the quickest and easiest down and dirty way is to look at the trial balance. So if we go into reports, there is a trial balance report, and for quick and ease of, I just searched for it, and we would be able to look for account, account code, and this would show you the ending balances of each account at a specific time period. So to make this match, look at the totals and make sure that if you run this year by year, it actually calculates correctly. Another way would be to look at your AR aging and AP aging, making sure that ties, as well as your profit and loss and balance sheet. So what I showed you, and I know I've been talking for 40-ish minutes or a little over an hour in terms of the migration process. And the migration process is very simple in the sense in the beginning of pulling the data, looking through the data, organizing the data, and making sure it's correct, and then preparing the import sheets. Preparing the import sheets can definitely become cumbersome because you're just looking at raw data in Excel, and you need to be able to look at it, pinpoint what fields are what, and match them from QuickBooks to Zoho and make sure that they're going in correctly. So and then after you do that, then there's the reconciliation process. Like I said, I like to do this year by year. So if I'm doing 10 years of data, I import 1 year of checks into expenses, make sure those match, then do 2011, make sure that matches 2012, and so on. So if there's an issue during the import or something didn't come over correctly, I can point it out and fix it, and fix it before the end of the end. The other thing is when you're importing, let's say, invoices or uh, expenses that have multiple line items, the Zoho will allow you to import that as long as there are the same reference number on that sheet. So if you have an invoice that has 5 line items, but the reference number or the invoice number is 100 and each line is 100, it will then put all those lines in one invoice. So to answer some previous questions, the main thing is to make sure there are no duplicate invoices, invoice numbers, or duplicate expense reference numbers, because then you would be adding lines to different to a different invoice or expense. So I hope that clears up or makes sense in terms of the process, in terms of looking through each module within QuickBooks, pulling the data accordingly, getting the Excel sheets that you need, starting with lists, customer lists, vendor lists, product lists first, and then going through each transaction type. And you can pull transaction types, as invoices through the sales module, using different reports that they have. And as long as you have them in Excel, you're able to change them accordingly to match the correct headers, then to be pushed. After all of those are pushed, then we reconcile. So if there's any questions in terms of um, the migration process, I definitely would be happy to answer them. I can also would be happy to have a call with you if you're currently going through this process or thinking to moving to Zoho Books. I do this all the time. This has become my wheelhouse with QuickBooks and Zoho migrations, as well as migrations from any other system. So moving the presentation forward, I'm going to ask Tala uh, to jump in and help. We're going to do an overview of Zoho Books and look at the system in a whole, not just from the migration process, but actually how to use it.
Yeah, but
While we're transitioning there, if you don't mind, let me jump in just a second. This is Val on. I want to talk to you about chart of accounts, folks. We've gone through a lot here today, but it's real important that you understand that your chart of accounts really are important. And if you don't understand how to set up a chart of accounts, get some help from somebody that understands accounting. When I was back in public practice, we had a doctor client go out, and back then on the market, Quicken was very popular. He bought Quicken. He did his entire year based on what he thought how things should have worked. And at the end of that year, we had to spend so much time. His tax bill to do his tax return was at least double because I had to go back through every transaction, clean stuff up, and move stuff from place to place to place. So it really does matter what that chart of accounts looks like. And as Joel pointed out in some of the questions, if you saw that a little bit about accounts and numbers, people with an accounting background are going to prefer to have numbers tied to these account descriptions. It just works better to have numbers tied to those. You can be able to do your P&Ls different ways. You'll be able to get your reports out different ways. So spend the time. I would go through and make sure that every account had numbers and that it followed a proper chart of account structure like Josh talked to you about today in the webcast. That all is very, very important. Lastly, in QuickBooks, there's some places where certain sets of books you can literally go in and say require accounts. That's an option in QuickBooks. We don't have that yet in Zoho Books, and I would love to see that in Zoho Books because as an accountant, when I work on a client's data set, I want to lock that down. So I want to require numbers. So if they go milly-nilly adding accounts around in here, I want them to pop out no matter what's going on. And that's really important. We don't quite have that level of control yet. We're going to be working on more of that as we go down the road. So that's my little 5-second deal on chart of accounts, folks. Make sure you got stuff clean. Otherwise, you're just making a mess for yourself.
And Val, just to jump in, because I really appreciate you emphasizing that point. Um, Besides the chart of accounts, clean data, chart of accounts really is your, bones of your accounting system. So that definitely makes sense to keep that as clean as possible and do that beforehand. And also just to make sure whatever data or issues that you have are corrected in the prior system so you can reference it and know what was changed.
Well, thanks, Josh, for kind of going over everything with the migrating systems. I'm going to go ahead and launch another poll question. This question is just going to ask if you'd like to be contacted by Josh. Like he mentioned, he does this all the time, and he's been really great for us to kind of, if we have any clients that need help or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and launch it right now.
Awesome.
And if you don't want to be contacted by him, or you want to contact him, at the end of the webinar, we will have his email up so you can reach out to him as well.
And I'll, respond right away. I'm happy to hear from anyone who is on this webcast, and I look forward to furthering the conversation. And want to thank the Zoho team. We're not done. We're definitely going to do some more demo, but I want to thank everyone for the opportunity thus far.
Hey, Josh, quick question. So it came into the question panel, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Basically, when you're importing invoices for customers, but you also want to import the payment transactions associated with them, what's like the basic process there? I believe you match the invoice numbers to the payments import. Is that right?
Correct. So yes, when you actually import received payments or payments received in Zoho, it asks you for an invoice number. And you can put the invoice number there so you can make sure you match them appropriately. Just to give a little more detail on this, because this is an actual issue um, within QuickBooks when people are migrating from QuickBooks to Zoho Books, is that there's no clear identification between the payment and the invoice. And to be able to pull the data where you can see what invoice number was associated with that payment. I use third-party tools, SQL queries and stuff like that to be able to pull that information from the back end. But to be able to link them sometimes, or to know what payment is associated with what invoice, is a bit tricky in certain systems that you're moving to Zoho Books. But as long as you know the invoice number, you can put that on your Excel sheet, and it's on there on the template, and it'll match that payment to that invoice.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that detailed answer. So as Josh was mentioning, what we're going to do now is we've already gone through all of the details with migrating the system. We're not done. What I'm going to do is give you a quick overview of Zoho Books. We're going to go through some of the different modules, and I'll ask Josh to jump in and kind of point out some of the features or things related to a migration or just using the system from his experience. Josh has been using Zoho for what, like 5 years now? And he's noticed lots of changes to the system. I'm sure, Josh, you probably appreciate some of those changes that have come about, but we're going to go through and kind of give you guys an overview, just because there's so many small features. Like, for example, if you were paying attention in the question panel, Joel, who's been answering a ton of questions for us, really appreciate that, Joel, mentioned that there's a way to actually make the account code mandatory. So if you want to use account codes and you want to make sure other folks have to enter them in, you can actually turn those on. So we're just going to kind of do a quick dive into Zoho Books. Before I do, I just want to ask Val, Nathan, Josh, is there anything else specifically that you want me to cover or want to add at this time, or should I just go ahead and jump in?
I
So
think
turn my
ready to
mic
jump
back
in.
on. Go ahead, Joel. Or Josh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think we could just jump in. I don't know
Okay.
if there's anything specific.
Folks,
Yeah, I'll look
I
at
do
the
want to
question.
introduce we have a couple of the partners on the call on the webcast. Susan Clark's already on the call, as well as Joel. Joel's been answering a number of questions as well. So there's a lot of information here together. I think collectively we've done a good job of bringing some great stuff out today. So thank you all for being here, especially partners who are contributing and helping us, answer some of these questions. Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Val. So what I want to just get started with is, of course, the dashboard. Something very straightforward. The first thing you notice when you log into Zoho Books, the first thing you'll notice is that it's an interactive dashboard. So this business isn't the most healthy, as you can tell, but to kind of give you an example, if I can highlight over the total receivables, it'll give me an exact amount of my overdue receivables. I'll also have current receivables, that'll populate here as a green bar. If I go ahead and click on this, it'll actually open up a report for aging details. Now, the thing about the reports within Zoho Books that are useful is that you can continually peel back different layers of the report and go deeper and deeper. So for example, if I wanted to view all of the associated invoices with this particular customer, I can go ahead and click on them and then bring up all of the details for this particular customer. So their total outstanding receivables, I can go and view their entire sales data, I can pull a statement for them, and on and on. And so this is the way that reports are set up within Books that kind of allow you to do that deep dive. So the same happens for total payables. I can go ahead and click on these. It'll bring me the list of unpaid bills that we currently have. For a cash flow statement, I can just hover above a particular month and time, and it'll bring me my opening balance, my ending balance, and then clicking on this, of course, takes me to a cash flow statement. Now, one of the most useful features, I think, within the business overview reports of Zoho Books is that you can actually schedule these reports to be automatically sent to you. So go ahead and click on the schedule report option at the top right, choose the frequency that you want this report sent to you. And if there's anyone outside of the organization that you'd also like to send this report to, you can actually enter those email addresses here. So maybe you have a group email that you want to send this to within your organization. Maybe you want to send this to your accountant automatically. You can enter in those email addresses here, choose whether you'd like to view this as an XLS file or just a viewable PDF, and then go ahead and hit save. So those are just some of the basic options here. You'll notice that the same concept of being able to drill down within the reports exists even in a report like the cash flow statement. So I can go into a particular account and view all the transactions associated with that account. One of the most useful functions of the reports in general is that you can export most of the reports to, of course, a PDF file if you just need to send it out, but also to a Microsoft Excel file and to Zoho Sheets. So some of you may have used Zoho Sheets before. If you haven't, it's basically Zoho's online spreadsheet tool. It's a free program. I love using it because not all of my computers have Microsoft Excel installed on them. I have it like on one desktop, but on my laptop I don't. If I'm using a Chromebook, I don't. So you can just click on Export to Zoho Sheets. It'll open it up in a new tab, and then that way you can do most of the functions that you'll need within Excel there.
Tala, if I could just jump in
Yeah.
quickly, I just want to tell everybody who's listening about, I think it was about 7 years ago before I got interested and into the Zoho market and starting doing migrations and becoming a Zoho Books advisor. One of the main functionalities that really was amazing to me and thought was the best thing ever was Zoho Sheets. And because you showed this, it's really great that if you're dealing with remote team, and you're dealing with all different types of people of different operating systems, to have something that is online and have the ability to edit stuff and also save it in a place that other people can view it within Zoho Books is definitely incredible. So I just want to point that out.
No, thank you so much for pointing that out. And it's gotten a ton of improvements along the way. It really is similar to what people expect with Excel. You'll find macros, you'll find the ability to create formulas. A thing that Val did in a previous session, which is really awesome, is that he actually created a template file that people could do calculations on when we did our PPP webinar for the Paycheck Protection Program. And we were actually able to share that with all the attendees who were able to use it. So that, especially in this moment in time where so many people are working from home, it helps a lot. If you haven't jumped on to using online office tools, Zoho Sheets is a really easy way to do so because it's free. So, so yeah, that was just a quick, I just opened up the tab here to show you kind of what that looks like. We'll jump back in to go down the dashboard. There's a few options here that you'll notice where you can actually change the time period. So for example, let's say I want to view the cash flow graph for the last 12 months instead of this last fiscal year, I can do so. And then the reports will also change. Further down, we have income and expense. So again, it's the same exact concept. Clicking on any of these will take me to a P&L report. And you can also switch between cash and accrual basis, as well as the time period. So really useful here. One of the most kind of often used parts of the dashboard, at least for me, is the top expenses section. So it's really easy to come in here, kind of see a piece of the pie chart and how much that expense makes up your total expense amount. And so you can go ahead and click on any of these and it'll open up, of course, that expense report there. Last couple things before we actually jump into the modules. Zoho Books has a projects module built in. So this is a rather simple project module. It's really designed to allow for time tracking for businesses. So for example, if you're a service-based business and you charge your customers based on time, it's a great way to bill for those hours. It's also very useful because it connects into Zoho Projects, which is our kind of super detailed, everything in the kitchen sink project management tool. So you can set up your more complex projects there and bring in those billable hours here to actually invoice customers. And then the last and one of the most important things that we'll cover is the bank and credit card integrations. So within Zoho Books, you can integrate thousands of different bank accounts. I'll show you exactly how to set up those banking integrations. But once those bank accounts are integrated, you'll see those balances coming in, and you'll be able to categorize transactions from those bank accounts to transactions that you've recorded, for example, invoices or expenses, and then the ability to run a reconciliation as well. So we're going to cover that part of it. The only other thing I want to mention, you'll notice at the bottom right of the dashboard is the Zoho Books live chat. So this is available 24 hours a day, Monday through Friday. Really useful. Honestly, you can get connected with someone within usually a minute and ask a quick question. Just a really great way to connect with someone from the Zoho Books team. You can also email or give us a call. I just like using live chat because I'm a millennial and I like chatting. So moving on to the
Before you move on, I'm going to go ahead and launch
oh, perfect. Thanks.
the 6 poll question.
Please do. And just a reminder, you only need to answer 6 out of the 8 poll questions. So if you miss 2, that's okay. I know some folks had to refresh or log back in. Just go ahead and chat us, that you were there, and we'll record your attendance. We'll be sure to send you your CPE certificate.
Yes, please.
For sure. Just one thing I wanted to mention, just from looking at the chat, this is something Joel mentioned, and I've talked to Josh about this in detail, is um, how much historical data do you actually want to bring into a system like Zoho Books, and kind of what that entails. And one of the things that you'll find within the reports module is you're able to use something called advanced analytics. So advanced analytics is basically Zoho's own business intelligence tool. You can open up any of the reports from Zoho Books into that product. You can also create tons of custom reports. The reason I brought up the topic of migrating old data and how much you want to bring in is one of the discussions I had with Josh was, what if you just bring in a lot of old data and throw it into analytics, use it for kind of the historical archive purposes? Let's say you want to look up, how much of a particular product you sold 5 years ago. Instead of having that data in your accounting system, have it in analytics and be able to kind of run those reports. Kind of, what's your opinion on that, Josh? And have you had success doing that?
So I haven't unfortunately used analytics in a live environment for this specific need. Um, but it definitely is a good tool. There are definitely a lot of people who say, you know what, there are certain types of things that I need, so we just put it in an Excel sheet. If you put it in an Excel sheet, excuse me, the Excel sheet could be lost. You don't really get the functionality of searching and being able to put that. So being able to put in Zoho Analytics is a great tool, and it's very easily accessible and able to find. The second part of your question, in terms of the amount of data to put in, um, I definitely think a lot of people who I speak to always say, well, I want everything. And there's a difference between want and need. And a lot of businesses don't need all their data. Typically, I would say 2 to 3 years makes the most sense for historic data. And there are ways, if you're currently paying for a different subscription, to end those subscriptions and be able to reference for 6 months to a year in your legacy system without actually bringing over everything into Zoho Books. Now, I'm not saying that that's not done, because if you want it, you can have it. But it really depends on what you're looking for and what type of historical data you have, and if you actually look back um, 10 years from now or not.
Perfect. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring up, because I've noticed, and there's other partners who I've talked to as well, who have used analytics kind of to success there. Just something to take a look at, see if that makes sense for you. It'll, at the very least, simplify your migration process, because you can rely on that data stored within that product. Now, we had some questions earlier on items and inventory, and something Josh mentioned that was really important. I just want to reiterate. So Zoho Books and inventory use FIFO, so that's first in, first out. I believe you mentioned QBO uses average cost, so that'll change the valuation of your inventory. It's just important to make sure you see and notice those differences. But otherwise, managing inventory in Zoho Books is very simple. So of course, the manual process is very straightforward, adding a new item or service. What more than likely what you'll be doing is importing these items, from your other system into Zoho Books. One thing you may want to do initially, though, is create custom fields. So I have a few custom fields I've created here. This is something you'll be able to do from the settings option here and then in preferences. So there, under inventory, you can create custom fields if you need to do that for those particular items. Now, one thing you'll notice down at the bottom is there's a checkbox here for tracking inventory. So what this does is it'll keep track of the number of units of inventory you have. And so, for example, if you have a reorder point that you'd like to be notified at, Zoho Books can do that for you. And then also, if you are bringing in inventory that has an opening stock, you can input that opening stock here and then continue on from there. Now, one of the things that replenishes stock in Zoho Books, of course, is creating purchase orders and then converting them to bills. So when you initially create a purchase order, it doesn't alter the stock level at that point. But once the purchase order is marked as received and converted to a bill, that's when the inventory levels go up for that item when you've received it from the vendor. Now, another feature that you'll notice that kind of comes up in a number of places, and this is the first place that you'll see that, is reporting tags. So these particular tags are all custom tags I've created, so don't worry about the labels that we've set up here. But I think, Josh, the best way to equate tags to QuickBooks vernacular is classes, right?
Correct.
So within Zoho Books, reporting tags can be applied to transactions in pretty much anywhere you record a transaction. So when you apply them here to items, for example, one of the ways you could use a tag is you could have a type of product. So this is actually an example I've used in the past. This was a real customer that came to a Zoho event, and they said, we sell medical devices, we also sell medicine, and we sell medical services. But it's all under one entity, but I want to be able to run reports on those aggregate items. So we may have 10 devices that we sell, but 100 medicines and 16 services. So what we did was we created this tag, type of product, and all we do is go through each item or service, so whether it's labeled as a good or service, and associate one of these tags with that product. Now, anytime this item is added to an invoice and that invoice is submitted, you'll actually be able to associate all of these transactions with that particular tag. So what you can then do is go into the reports module, and I can go to, for example, a P&L report, and I can actually customize this P&L based on filters. So one of those filters can be type of product. And let's say I want to see the type of product that are medical devices. So I can go ahead and run this report, and it's only going to show me P&L associated to medical devices. And then I can do this for other types of tags as well. So you can tell this is something that's really customizable. You can create all different types of categories. One of the other areas you'll see tags come up is actually being applied to customer lists. So I can associate a tag to a customer, and maybe I want to group customers together that are in a certain region or in a certain state, for example, and be able to run specific reports on P&L, balance sheet, cash flow with those particular tags. So it's really interesting. You can also do it at the journal entry level. I'm sure, Josh, you've used tags a lot, I imagine.
Yes. And also incorporating those tags with, let's say classes that during a migration.
Fantastic. And it's just something that makes it a little bit easier. For example, one of the things we were talking about was, having lots of different chart of accounts. A lot of times people do that for different types of transactions to be able to group them together. But a safer way sometimes is to just use a tag that doesn't actually affect the types of chart of accounts that you have, right?
Correct. And just to point out, Tala, is tags are not a general ledger posting item. They're used for reporting.
Right.
So that definitely helps. Just to know that your tags are good for the user to use for reporting, but doesn't make a financial impact.
Right. Exactly. And doesn't make it any more complex of a system or confusing or anything related to changing the actual kind of bones of the accounting system, as you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So moving on to the banking module, this one is super important. It's actually probably I get the most questions related to this module. So let me just show you how to initially set up a bank account and then how you can actually categorize transactions. So the first step, let's say you don't have any accounts. Of course, you'd click on the Add Bank or Credit Card button. And what happens now is you would select the name of your institution. So there are thousands of bank accounts here, including credit unions, local credit unions. For example, where I live, I bank with this one credit union called San Mateo Credit Union here in San Mateo County in California. But there are lots of banks, thousands. Now, once you go ahead and select your institution, what it's going to do is ask you to log into your account. Now, this is something that is done through a secure system. So Zoho doesn't actually store these details. This is processed directly through a processing system that is connected to your bank account, and it brings in those transactions into Zoho Books. So once you've actually set that up, of course, I don't have one of those to set up at this moment in time. What you'll notice on the following screen, and unfortunately I can't show this to you here, is that it'll ask you from what date forward you would like to bring in transactions. And usually the furthest you can go back that I've ever seen is only 90 days. So at the most, you can go back 90 days and it'll bring in transactions after that. Anything prior to that that you'd want to bring in, what you'll want to do is you'll want to go into your bank's actual login, and you'll want to export your statements as a CSV file. And once you've actually created that bank account, for example, let's say it's this Chase Bank account, you'll go into Chase Bank and you'll simply import the statement using that CSV file, or there's like these 6 other formats you can use, TSV, XLS, QIF, CAMT, and on. And it's the same exact process that Josh talked about earlier. So you're going to match the transactions, you're going to match the column headers, and then you'll also select specific details there. It'll ask you, are debits and credits in a separate line? Are they in the same line? Are they negative numbers for credits? So just select those details. You can save those particular kind of formatting details and then import the document. One of the nice features within importing bank statements is that if you notice there's something messed up, you can undo an import for a bank statement altogether. So all those transactions can be removed. Anything to add in terms of importing bank statements, Josh?
No, I just was going to say the typical banks do only allow 90 days. Bank of America, American Express, Chase, and there are some banks that do more than 90 days. So depending on who you're using, you might be able to do that. Besides the bank statements, nothing else to add, but I do want to just add in terms of the banking module, a lot of my consults and discussions with clients who are Zoho Books users have lots of questions in terms of how to match transactions and add transactions appropriately, and being able to add the transaction and make sure that you have the correct expense account or income account is very appropriate and very important, because that is what's linked to the general ledger and how the transaction's put in. So just to note that that's definitely a key feature, and depending on the type of business, this really eliminates manual entry.
Fantastic. Thank you for those details, Josh. So now, once you have transactions in your account, what's going to happen is you're going to want to categorize those transactions once, the associated documents are in place. So for example, these are all withdrawals. So I would need to have some sort of expense or bill that reflects these transactions. So one option is that those transactions are already created, right? If you are an astute kind of expense taker, you would have used your Zoho Books mobile app or the Zoho Expense mobile app when you actually incurred that expense. And I do this as often as I can. Makes it really easy. When I travel for Zoho, I take a picture of my receipt. It'll auto scan it in our Zoho Expense app. It just makes it a lot easier to bring in, or my Zoho Books app as well. And what will happen is when I click on one of these transactions, it'll bring up the relevant transaction to associate with it. So in this case, I don't have a transaction that's already been created, so this expense hasn't been already entered. So what I can do is I can go ahead and categorize it manually. Let's say I haven't actually created that expense, so I'll go ahead and choose this expense account. So this is a IT expense. The date that is incurred is already populated here. Selecting the vendor is something that you'll want to do to put in that information. And then if you have any additional details, it'll bring in the description automatically from the bank transaction, but of course you can edit this. And then you can associate your receipt here as well. And then finally, if this is a billable expense, I can associate this to a customer and mark it billable. You can also associate it to a customer and not mark it billable to help run reports later. For example, you may have a project that you're working on for a customer and you want to know how much these total expenses added up to. So you can do that as well. And you'll notice that I actually have a new kind of label here that you may not see in yours, which is potentials. This is a CRM module. So if you've integrated Zoho CRM into your Zoho Books, and you actually use what's called either an opportunity or a potential in Zoho CRM, you can actually associate this expense to that as well. And then finally to a project, as I mentioned. And then you'll notice that good old reporting tags shows up here too. Now, this is, of course, the manual way to do this. One of the automated ways is that Zoho Books' system also allows you to send scans of receipts and then create transactions from there. There are a number of documents that you can use within Zoho Books to do scans for. So it's not just expenses, but you can do purchase orders and sales orders and things like that. We are currently working on doing multi-line items. So right now it's just a full total amount that it scans for. However, if you use Zoho Expense, you can get unlimited receipt scans. Again, just use your phone, take a picture of a receipt, and then move those expenses here into books. And then you can do the categorizing here as well. So I know there's kind of a lot of detail there, but all those options are available in terms of receipt scanning. Now,
Hey, Paula, sorry to interrupt, but before you continue, I'm going to go ahead and launch the 7th poll question.
Okay.
And just a reminder, you need to answer 6 out of the 8 questions. And it looks like majority of people have been answering every single question, so that's great news for us.
Awesome. Thank you for bringing that up, Nathan.
Yeah, just one comment too, Tyler, while we're sitting here for a second. I've had a lot of people requesting demo data sandbox, like a test company for people to go in and use. The Books team knows we want this, and everybody on this call has asked them for at least a couple of times. And
I was actually just talking to someone from our Books team about this,
right.
and they are working on making it available for Books users generally. There is a roundabout way that you can use a sandbox for Books right now, and that is if you have ever started or tried to use Zoho subscriptions. Excuse me, Zoho subscriptions has a sandbox there. And so when you create a sandbox in one Zoho expense or Zoho finance app, it creates it in the other finance apps as well. So if you've created it in Zoho subscriptions, you can come back into Zoho Books, click on that organization and link it, and then you'll have a Zoho Books sandbox account.
So we do have kind of a workaround for now. Nice one. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like real quick. But
that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It is something that's important. Another option that you'll notice is that if you can see my screen, you can just go ahead and click on the name of your organization, come down here, click on manage, and you can just create a new organization. So Zoho Books lets you create like 4 trial accounts at any one time, maybe more, 4 or 5 trial accounts at any one time. And a lot of times what I tell people to do is that's a full-fledged account for 2 weeks at a time. So you can use that as a demo, you can use that as a sandbox to test out stuff, and then just blow up the account. Come back here and make sure it's your test account, not your real one, and just go ahead and hit delete. It'll ask you like 5 times whether you're sure you want to delete it, and then once you do, you can start over from there. So that's kind of a simpler way to do it that doesn't affect your actual organization, and you can create as many test accounts as you want as long as you delete the old ones, and you don't have any more than, I believe, 4 at a time. So a couple options there, but thanks for bringing that up, Val. I know that's important, and we'll work on getting that feature to everybody. Now, just a couple things left that I wanted to show you, and kind of gloss over some of the more high-level details to go into some of the stuff that I want to point out. So the sales and purchase modules are very straightforward, right? These are pretty much everything you'd expect from an accounting system. One of the things is that you may not use all of these particular modules, right? You may not have a need for estimates or retainer invoices, even though the functionality is awesome. And I suggest, if your business process calls for it, to actually use these documents. But what you can do is go ahead and come over to settings, which is again that gear icon on the top right, come down to preferences, and then under general, just go ahead and turn off the modules that you don't need. And the opposite is also true. If you create a new account and you notice, there's some modules that you do need, come over here and make sure you turn on the modules that you are going to use. It just helps to kind of unclutter the area from stuff that you won't use, and take away, documents that aren't relevant to you. So actually creating these transactions is very straightforward. I'm not going to go into that, but what I do want to show you is actually customizing, for example, the invoice template. So if I was going to create a new invoice, you just click on that plus icon there, kind of a shortcut. And you'll notice at the very, very bottom, there is this template option at the bottom right. So it says standard template. I can go ahead and click on change. And so if I already have the templates created, I can go ahead and do that. Now, one thing that I'll show you is how do you actually create these templates, which you'll want to do, in your migration. Come over to settings, again, click on preferences, and then come down to invoices. So you'll notice there's sales, and then you'll see invoices. So, excuse me, this is to actually create field customizations and buttons. To do templates, you'll want to click on templates on the left-hand side, and then click on invoices. And so one of the new features that came out some time ago was actually doing a fully custom layout. If you click on new, you'll be able to use, I think there's 16 or so different invoice templates here, and then you can modify them in detail. You can change up, not just the colors, but also the labels, the spacing, kind of the width of some of the different areas. But let's say you want to do something that isn't listed here. What you can actually do is just create a new custom layout. And here you can insert placeholders for different options. So for example, one of the things that I wanted to do was none of the invoice templates let me put in a picture of the item in the individual kind of line here under the items box. So what I can do is there's kind of this option to generate a placeholder. So I know that the picture of items is inside the items module. It's going to be an image. And so I'm going to go ahead and find item image. And then it creates this placeholder for me. So I can either copy and paste this, or what I can do is just go ahead and put my cursor down here and then click insert placeholder, and it'll place this placeholder here. And now what I can do is I can save this template, and I've actually already done this, but it'll populate a picture of that item that's listed from this line item here. Pretty neat. This is something that you can actually customize a bunch of different things on. Sometimes people put different languages, all sorts of stuff. So go ahead and use this custom templates feature, or use the standard templates to modify those templates, and then choose whichever one is going to be your default template, and then you can change it from there. So you'll notice that you can do templates for every single module within Books. And one thing you'll notice here that this was a question that came up earlier. Zoho Books does have check printing, and there is a check template and specific checks that you can order as well. So if you're interested, you can go ahead and check that out as well. So moving back over to kind of the main area. So that's the sales module. Again, very straightforward, and the purchases side here. The one area that I do want to focus on is the customers and vendors option. So I'm going to go ahead and click on customers to show you what this looks like. Both are very similar. And one of the questions that we got earlier is, hey, I have customers that are also vendors. How would I set those up? So what you'd want to do is you'd want to create those separately. So create a customer, put in all their information here, and create the vendor as well. And then once you've actually created them, you'll go ahead and select a customer, and you'll come down and you'll actually link it to a vendor. So for example, this customer, I'm going to say this is linked to a vendor. I'll choose under my list of all these vendors, and then I can go ahead and actually put them together. So what this will do is it'll link their profiles together. It'll allow you to view receivables and payables in the same contact section. Both of those customers and vendors will still be there, but you'll see all of the information consolidated in one area. Makes that more useful. One of the other features within Zoho Books that I find really useful is the client portal. So this is something that, if you're migrating to Zoho Books, you probably didn't have in your older system. It just comes included within Books. There's no added charge, and it's a really nice feature. The client portal basically allows customers to log into their own area and view their own statement. They can edit their billing address, shipping address. They can make payments on invoices or put down payments on estimates, and they can also communicate with you there. There's a lot of detail. Unfortunately, I can't go into all of it now, but what you can do is under the main settings area, under preferences, you'll actually set up your client portal. And then when you want to invite a client to a client portal from within the customers option where we are, you'll click on configure, and then you can send them an invite to the client portal. It's really neat. It also doesn't have any Zoho branding on it. And if you want to change the URL, you can actually do a complete customization and change that. So it won't even say books.zoho.com. You can actually put, portal.mybusiness.com, whatever your domain is, and fully customize that, put it on your website as well. So one of those options that I recommend taking a look at.
Hey, Tala, I'm just going to launch the last poll question as we're coming to an end of this webinar. And also just a reminder that if you want to receive that those 2 CPE credits, you need to answer the evaluation at the very end. And also, if you just want to answer the evaluation, it really helps us out and kind of organize our upcoming webinars. That's why we extended our webinars, actually, is because someone on the evaluation mentioned that we should extend it just to do more demos for everybody.
Thank you for that, Nathan.
Awesome. You can go ahead and continue, Tal.
Fantastic. So just to kind of round out this session, I just want to point out a couple other functions that are really important. So I mentioned time tracking. This is a really simple project management tool I recommend kind of taking a look at. The main thing you want to see here is that there are 4 different billing methods that you can set up. So I can either bill based on just a fixed cost for this project, or total project hours, individual task hours, or individual staff hours. So staff hours are really useful if you have multiple different employees working on this. They can all have a different hourly rate that they can't see, but they can log hours for. There's also a really great Chrome extension to just log hours within Zoho Books. You'll notice this at the very top right, I believe. I just opened up my Zoho Books extension. You can see I can select the project if I had one task, and then I can just hit start on the timer and then come back, hit stop later, or just log my entire time. So there's some really useful features. I think it's also on the Apple Watch and definitely on the iPhone and Android. So take a look at time tracking or project management. One of the newer features we launched this past year was client approvals. So if you need to actually get approval on these hours before you bill them to a client, you can use client approvals to do that. And then last but not least, I know we covered reports and kind of some of these other areas. I just want to leave you with something to kind of think about. Is there's a really sophisticated automation module within Zoho Books. Typically, I do an entire webinar on just focusing on creating automation and workflow rules, and that is something that will come up soon in the kind of schedule of webinars. But you can actually create workflows here based on if-then statements. So for example, if a invoice has not been paid by the due date, then apply a 10% late payment fee. Or if a particular invoice is over a certain amount, let's say over $5,000, then get approval before you send it out. So there's some really cool things you can do here. You can create custom functions, custom buttons, integrate third-party applications, send text messages. There's all sorts of stuff. Just take a look at the automation module. There's a lot of really neat things that you can actually set up here. And looking at the help guide will definitely help you kind of navigate through this. You can find the help guide by clicking on the question mark icon, and you'll see help document. You also see the migration guide is listed here as well. So just want to leave you with that. I know we covered a lot of information. I just want to remind everyone that this session is recorded, and we will share the recording with you. Please do stick around. Don't close this tab yet, this browser tab, because we'll open up a evaluation for you. So we need to actually get your CPE. And then I just put up Josh's contact information on the screen. Feel free to screenshot that. We'll also try to send that to you afterwards. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this 2-hour session. I had fun. I'm sure Josh, Val, and Nathan did as well. If you guys would like to come up and say goodbye, thank you to everyone.
Tala, just a quick comment, Tala. There is a question about how do you refund a customer with a check out of QuickBooks and get that appropriately handled? I didn't know the answer to that one. You might want to look at that question. Quick.
Sounds good. I will take a look at that question, and we will try to email back. If you can put it in the evaluation as well, it'll help us contact you to get that answer. We are at the
Yeah, I
top of
really
the hour.
appreciate everybody coming out, and
Thank
Josh,
you.
thank you for setting all this up, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it as well, and I had a absolute blast.
Take care. Hope you have a great rest of your week and weekend coming up.
Thank you, everyone.